I feel like I'm always being watched. I hate being watched. These are the first few lines that will haunt you once you open F.H. Batacan's novel, Smaller and Smaller Circles. Bagging the title of the National Book Award in 2002, many people have labeled this book to be, if not the cornerstone piece for Philippine crime novel writing. As a person who didn't know this fact prior to reading the whole novel, I will share my piece of thoughts about this book, more specifically how it maximized the potential of a particular point of view when writing a compelling narrative. Since this book will touch on topics about violence, murder, and sexual abuse, viewer discretion is advised. I'll begin my book review with a synopsis of the novel. I'll spare you the spoilers as much as I can since it would be best for you to discover the book's secrets on your own. Side note, Smaller and Smaller Circles has a film adaptation by TVA Studios and is viewable on YouTube. I highly recommend reading the book first before watching the film since some aspects of the narrative work best in its novel form. More on that later. Set in the late 90s Philippines, the book opens with the discovery of the mutilated body of a young boy in the Payatas dump. Father Gus Sands, a Jesuit priest and a forensic anthropologist, along with Father Jerome Lucero, another Jesuit priest who's also a clinical psychologist, were asked by the NBI director Francisco Lastimosa to help solve this case. It was later revealed that several other boys also fell victim to a similar horrific fate, suggesting that these murders were the works of a serial killer, something that is very uncommon in the Philippines, according to the police. The priests tried to piece together the psychological profile of the killer through the patterns that surfaced when they conducted autopsies and private investigations. The involvement of the priest was constantly questioned and hindered by some police officials and higher-ups, but Father Sands and Father Lucero were able to prove their competence, although at the expense of another victim. Together with Father Sands' ex-student, a journalist named Joanna Bonifacio, and a more united police task force, the priests were finally able to identify the serial killer and confront him before he could take another boy's life. As I was reading this book, I easily come to realize that it was written in a manner that's quite easy to digest. It is something that people who easily get overwhelmed by reading complex text would enjoy, and I mean this statement as a compliment to the writer. Although the book talks about topics that are graphic, frustrating, and even mentally and emotionally scarring, you'll still close the book with a sense of satisfaction, not because the ending is necessarily a happy one, but because the book allowed you to understand the humanity of most of the characters, even the ones who were painted as monsters. When reading crime narratives, most readers often focus too much on the whodunit aspect of the story, which, admittedly, if you have such a mindset while you are reading Smaller and Smaller Circles, you'll mostly find yourself disappointed to know that the killer isn't one of the characters that was introduced earlier and is the least expected person to have the capacity to kill someone. So shout out to Father Emil. I'm sorry for doubting your innocence. But anyways, in an interview with a broadcast journalist named Noel King, Batacan said that her debut novel is the first Filipino novel that's more typical of the Western idea of a mystery killer and is more of a whodunit than a who-done-it type of narrative. As a reader, I find this interview to be quite valuable. The focus on the why aspect of the mystery made me appreciate the writer's choice of POV for this novel even more. Let me elaborate more on that aspect. Smaller and Smaller Circles is written in the third-person omniscient point of view, meaning that the narrator of the story is a separate entity, someone that can access and share not only the actions but also the thoughts of the characters. This type of perspective allows the novel to highlight different characters in different chapters, and for me, that is where the brilliance of the book lies. When I think of Smaller and Smaller Circles, I think of chapters 23 and 34 of the novel. I'll start with chapter 23, the chapter that represents horror. In this chapter, the readers are introduced to a new character named Dodong, who fits the profile of the killer's potential victims. The chapters leading up to this point of the story have already established how the suspect finds a new victim every first Saturday of the month, and how in the story the said day is approaching fast. With all this in mind, and as readers learn that Dodong is alone in the slums of Payatas, we are thrust into a hair-raising situation. It is here that you'll ask yourself as a reader, is the book really requiring us to witness a murder? And the answer is unfortunately yes. Here's a passage after Dodong wakes up from getting hit by a rock. Yellow light, then blackness. Yellow light, then blackness. The pain in his left eye intensifying as he becomes more aware. Yellow light, then blackness. Is the room moving? He tries to sit up, but the pain in his left eye and the whole left side of his head is unbearable. He starts to panic. No, no, no. Yellow light, then blackness, then blackness. This section still disturbs me whenever it resurfaces in my thoughts. It is implied that Dodong unfortunately woke up while half of his face was getting skinned by the killer before ultimately passing out of consciousness, presumably for the last time. What's scary is that we are given a glimpse of Dodong's mind while all of this is happening, and this was what I meant when I said some aspects of the story worked best on the novel form. It was in this chapter that the horror felt nearest. It felt like I was playing a first-person horror game on the VR or virtual reality console, and I'm forced to watch a cutscene where the killer is torturing me as a character. And in my opinion, this is the standout chapter of the novel. Another chapter that I want to talk about is chapter 34. I don't want to give much of the details of this chapter. However, at this point of the story, most of the victims were already identified by the priests because of their dental records. This chapter basically highlighted the grieving mothers and families of the victims. It is one of the most emotional chapters, and as a reader, you would start to ask questions like, why would a serial killer be so heartless as to take the lives of the children? Why is our justice system so neglectful towards the lower class? So basically, this chapter adds fuel to the why aspect of the narrative. Many crime stories humanize the villain so that we can understand their motives and even feel an ounce of sympathy for some of them. However, it is rare for fictional crime narratives, especially ones that involve serial or multiple killings to humanize the victims and their families. Therefore, in this chapter, many readers made a connection and empathized with the bereaving characters, which ultimately made the capture of the killer more rewarding. And based on those two chapters as an example, we have come to realize how important the choice of point of view is, as it is impactful not only to the readership but also to the story itself. I recommend this book to anyone who wants to start reading Philippine literature in English, because I think it is a successful crime novel that exposes the ugly side of Philippine justice and religious systems and the effects of such a corruption to the lives of ordinary Filipinos. I stand by my claim that this novel's greatest asset is its use of the POV. And if you are an aspiring writer, this should be something that you must always consider when weaving narratives. So I'll give Smaller and Smaller Circles by F.H. Batacan a 4.4 out of 5. Thank you for listening, and I'll catch you guys again next time. Bye.